Hello, my name is Kneath. I'm from the UK and now living in Cambodia. I've been working in the social impact and justice space for the last 15 years, working in a number of different areas, including education, youth development, refugee rights, anti-trafficking. I have a background in organizational leadership, strategic planning, and program design, and I'm currently the Partnerships and Development Director for Chab. Chab is an anti-trafficking organization that's been operating in Cambodia for the past 20 years. We're the leaders of the country's largest anti-trafficking coalition of 50 plus members of NGOs and CSOs. We also have programs in protection and prevention with a focus on holistic supports, survivor leadership, and community protection frameworks. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion for a number of reasons. One being I've witnessed firsthand the impact of the USAID cuts. Also because, like many people in this room and online, I'm sure, funding is a major part of my job. But most importantly, I'm interested in alternative models and creating more just systems. And I think that despite the hardships and the challenges of the USAID cuts and other funding cuts, now is a great opportunity to have discussions and perhaps create something better. So really looking forward to this.
My name is Mallika, and I'm the head of partnerships for Freedom Collaborative. Freedom Collaborative is a global organization with a mission to strengthen civil society response in preventing human trafficking and exploitation. I'm incredibly excited to be here today at the ERIC conference, speaking on the Changing Funding Landscape panel. Like many organizations in this region, Freedom Collaborative lost our funding virtually overnight due to the USAID funding freeze in early 2025. We had to navigate a difficult season while continuing our essential work, supporting grassroots civil society organizations, some of which had to terminate certain projects providing critical service to survivors or shut down entirely. This has been a huge crisis and a wake-up call for many NGOs, including ours. There is great vulnerability that many NGOs still face in fundraising challenges and a continual reliance on government funding from outside of Asia to support work in this region. What is crucial is figuring out how to sustain our efforts and ensure the survival of our organizations, despite already limited capacity and resources, in an environment where funding for the protection of vulnerable population is steadily decreasing.
I'm Jennifer Oakley, and I serve as the co-director and program partner at the Imago Day Fund, a US-based grant-making foundation dedicated to co-creating a more just, free, and sustainable world where all human beings can thrive and flourish together. As part of our work, we support grassroots leaders and organizations working to end human trafficking and modern-day slavery at home in Boston and internationally. In the past 6 months, the anti-trafficking sector has faced unprecedented challenges from the ongoing global shifts in foreign aid. At the Imago Day Fund, we're leaning into this moment instead of pulling back. We've increased our annual budget and expanded support for our partners' well-being. I'm excited to join this conversation today to share some ways we've responded and some things we've learned about building more resilient funding partnerships as we all consider what a redesigned and more equitable funding landscape could be.
Hello, my name is Tomomi. I am co-founder and CEO of Torii International. Torii International is the philanthropic startup registered in Tokyo in July 2024. While Torii itself is the startup, 3 co-founders, including myself, bringing the extensive working experience on the issue of the human trafficking in South Asia, particularly in India. And we have played the role of the systems facilitator as well as systems integrator in the programs such as the collective impact model for access to justice by the survivors, as well as survivors leadership program in India. As everybody is aware, the entire philanthropic ecosystem is going through the major transition as well as disruption, which is making all of us very anxious, very uncertain, and a little bit scared. Who is going to fund me? What is going to happen tomorrow? Together with my colleague panelists, I'm really looking forward to explore this uncertainty together with all of you so that we we will enter into that path with the curiosity rather than getting caught with the anxiety. And I'm really looking forward to having a very fruitful conversation with all of you. Thank you. See you.
Hi guys. I have been very much looking forward to this panel. We had some really fun discussions in preparing this panel, and I was like, oh, I can't wait till we can take this to air. This is so good and so much wisdom among these panelists. So just to kind of tell you where we're going and what's going on in this panel, we're going to talk a little bit about what happened this year. I feel like that's kind of the elephant in the room, and we're all talking about it. How did cuts impact you? Did they impact you? Things of that nature. But we don't want to stay there. So we're going to kind of move into a big picture. What does a more just model of funding look like? And then we're going to try to zero in a little bit more on specifics and how do we achieve better outcomes for our sector. So we're going to get started. I'm going to have some questions, and we're just kind of go around. So looking at kind of the first thing with the USAID collapse happened, and here we are. I know for our organization, in a lot of ways it felt like COVID again, where it was just like this overnight change and this, oh my gosh, what do we do? You know, we know our partners had to dismiss staff and just deal with like really unexpected reorganization and re-strategizing. I know that's true for a lot of you as well. So as we were kind of in the middle of all of this, the GLC worked really closely with the Freedom Collaborative, trying to collect data from all of our partners and their partners as well, and just trying to aggregate this, like what is going on, what has happened. And then even having space for people to come in and just be like, I'm so upset. I just had to let go a bunch of staff members, and just a space for people to kind of process it. But the Freedom Collaborative was collecting this data and doing an amazing job just kind of on the front line of trying to understand how it impacted the sector. So Mallika, I'm curious if you just share a little bit about what you guys learned.
Yeah, absolutely. So the loss of USAID funding has been incredibly huge. As many of you may have known, at least of one organization or many others who have been affected by this funding crisis. So larger anti-trafficking organizations have shared with us how their basically funding has been maybe cut, and that has affected smaller projects, or it has affected maybe certain staff or the number of people there. But I actually want to highlight the number of, and maybe even a bit more of a sobering impact on local or smaller grassroots organizations who have been really disproportionately affected by this funding crisis. So according to Freedom Collaborative partners around the globe, many smaller local organizations weren't even aware that they were either sub-grantee or direct beneficiary of USAID. So they thought that they actually were getting funding directly from organizations that they were working with. So of course, to imagine waking up to the news overnight and suddenly realizing that they have been affected and had their funding cut was obviously very huge. And these are all projects supporting, really critical work directly with survivors of human trafficking. So it could be shelters in Cambodia supporting survivors of trafficking. It could even be supporting pro bono attorneys in Pakistan. So there's like a huge variety of things that have been affected around the globe. So in the beginning of this year, particularly in late January, it was actually really difficult to find smaller CSOs or organizations who are willing to speak openly about the USAID funding cuts, because they had this really huge fear of repercussions. They fear if they spoke out, they might have retaliation or something that happens to them. So there's been a lot of requests by many organizations to stay anonymous, actually, and to kind of not put their names out for publication. So for one organization, which I have to name, which I cannot name, but they're a local civil society organization based in Thailand. They do incredible work providing case management support and also working with survivors of human trafficking around in Thailand. With this organization, they spoke to us of their frustration of the funding cuts. In particular, they said that they learned about the funding cuts actually not directly from the implementing agency who given them money, but they actually learned about the funding cuts through social media. So there was virtually no communication from this agency providing them money for their critical work, and they actually had to press for many weeks to get like even a response or even to their questions or their concerns, their anxiety. They were actually even requested to have their social media posts taken down, which is actually really troubling because given that obviously their activities is under USAID and they're the main beneficiary of this project, without being able to post about their events or their trainings or anything that they've done, they virtually had to go like radio silent, which is actually a really scary implication that we may not have thought of. They also fear a lot of retaliation if they spoke openly. So aside from like social media posts, engaging with even Freedom Collaborative, who is a trusted, organization who have been around for over a decade, that's actually, really troubling for us to hear as well. So this organization, along with a handful of many different organizations in Asia, have actually gone away very quietly. So some are, of course, like a little bit luckier, and they're able to attain some additional funding through, different cuts or changes to their programs. So we had, for example, like closure of like particular projects. We also had, some organization letting go of their staff, which is actually unfortunate because, especially in countries like Cambodia, they had a lot of disproportionate effect to this work. Especially them ranking tier 3 on the trafficking in persons report, it actually means that they're so reliant on this funding and they cannot really exist or operate without it. And so there's like all of these different country-specific contexts that we might not be thinking of. So at the core, we think the system is actually really broken. It's been broken before, and it's actually just shown that there's actually a really big divide in this organization. So even though we're all NGOs and CSO working in this sector, this funding fallout has actually only really exacerbated the divide between bigger organizations who might have had a bit more financial security or maybe something to bounce back on compared to like really local grassroots organizations who are just slowly disappearing, disintegrating, and we actually might not even know about it because everything has been really quiet on that front. So from my personal experience, there's actually been a lot of sympathy and empathy towards, organizations who have been affected. So people coming to us or many different organizations directly and saying, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I can't believe this is happening. But what I find really unique and interesting is that behind our backs or behind a lot of these organizations back, there's actually a lot of antipathy. There's a lot of scrutiny and also questions and even judgment. Why, for example, there's a lot of narrative around should have or could have. Why did you not diversify your incomes? Or perhaps how could you how did you not plan for this or do something a little bit have a bit of a contingency plan? And I think it's really important to reflect back and say, how does one prepare for a crisis like this? You talk about survivor-led organizations or even small grassroots organizations who have refugees, asylum seekers, or even people with a ton of experience trying to really pull together and make the organization exist for all these years. How do you turn to them and say, you should have done better? I think it just goes against, not even just the morality of it, but just general human decency, which is actually a little bit lost in this kind of work. Many organizations, unfortunately, do not have the luxury, the technology, or even the skills to do financial forecasting, for example, or coming up with contingency plans. And so this crisis has really shown that, unfortunately, to this day, many NGOs and CSOs have so much vulnerability, not just in fundraising, but also in existing, and also being in a space where they can openly talk about their work without fear of repercussions.
Thank you. So, Kneath, you are with an organization that is a direct service provider, and I'm curious how your organization experienced the shift in funding this year.
Yep, so I'm speaking on behalf of Chab in Cambodia, and I think it's important to kind of set the context a little bit. The USAID funding cuts are undeniably the most significant, but this is a trend. So the year prior, one of our back donors, a European government, had also reduced funding. The UK previously reduced funding DFID, folded it into the FCDO. And now we're seeing many countries follow the US's approach and continuing to reduce funding further, being diverted towards migration within the countries and conflict and military. So aid is kind of the low-hanging fruit in the public in terms of what can we cut, and we're seeing that across the board. But of course, the US aid funding cut was the most significant. As an organization, Chab has only been funded by USAID for about 2 years. And we're also a sub-award. So as you mentioned, a middle organization receives the funds directly and then disperses those funds among other grassroots organizations, with the idea being they remove risk. Okay, because it's taxpayers' money, of course, aid money, right? And so there needs to be this level of transparency there. And so USAID funds supported Chabdai's community-based care projects, which focused on working with survivors of human trafficking, providing counseling, providing livelihood support, providing emergency support, leadership, survivor care forums. So all essential services. And when the funding was cut, as mentioned, it happened overnight. So we had the money today, and then tomorrow we don't have the money anymore. And there was nothing put in place in terms of labor laws or any protections for staff, and really very little thought put into place of survivors who are already on a journey and how that journey is now going to be completed. So those funds were kind of taken overnight, as I mentioned. And so we were really forced to decide, of our essential services, which are the most essential? Okay? That's a really difficult question to answer. But we had to look at what can we streamline, what can we remove, and what can we start to focus on. And unfortunately, we were one of the organizations that lost staff. We had to let go 9 staff, project managers, counselors, very highly qualified local staff that have been working in the community for many, many years. Very talented individuals, and we were just unable to support them anymore because of the situation. So. And I think that when I talk about this, some people might be thinking, well, we've never received money from USAID. And I think it's important to remember that even if you did not receive money directly or through a sub-grant, it will eventually affect all of us, because when this funding is taken away, vulnerability is increased across the board, and we know that vulnerability leads to further exploitation and potentially trafficking. So the ripple effect will be felt across the board. And I think that so we had the initial, this is terrible, oh my gosh, how do we deal with this situation? But there was also hope and trust. And we're very fortunate to have donor supporters and partners that were able to support us in this difficult time. One is on this panel today, another is in the audience, and another is joining online. And what was great about these partners is they listened to us. They just reached out and listened. And gave our team an opportunity to explain the situation, explain what was happening, and then they went away and very quickly they came up with a response. And through that emergency funding, we were able to move things around in the organization to ensure that survivors who were already receiving services would continue to receive those services. But of course, we still had to make other changes. We could not take on the same number of cases and such that we had planned that year. But it really is, you know, it's an emotional roller coaster from down here to then receiving that support to bring you up. The other thing I would say is that the other thing we've experienced is when an external pressure like this happens, it accelerates. And it's accelerated Chabdai's strategy. So last year was the end of Chabdai's 5-year strategic plan. We had plans already to be focusing more on our coalition work. And now this has been accelerated, right? So when we had a new 5-year strategy, you have your change management plan on your Excels. We've just merged all those cells into one. It has to happen now because we have to react and we have to think fast. And I think that's almost been a good thing. It's created new opportunities, and it's allowing us to focus on what we're really good at. So yeah, what are we? We're 6 months, 7 months into the year. My hair is a little bit more gray. This is not a haircut. It's fallen out. No, it has not. But yeah, it's been an interesting time.
Yeah, I like how you talk about the hope of it all, because I feel the same in conversations with partners and colleagues. We've been forced to really look at, okay, what really is essential? You know, are there extraneous things? And have we been good stewards, I guess, of the funding that we have, or is there a way that we can become even better stewards of the funding now that there's less of it? So Tomomi, we talked a little bit in our conversation just kind of that the shift has not just been with this USAID thing, it's actually been happening for a while. And you talked a little bit about the global shift in funding. So I'm curious if you would tell us a little bit more about that.
Thank you. So I would like to talk about the three shifts that I have observed so far. One is the geographical shift, and the second is the thematic shift, and the third is the approach shift. So I have been working in this sector for the last 13 years, and particularly after the COVID, I would say that two major financiers that I have been working with has shifted the focus from, let's say, India to their own countries. I think because the war are happening in the world and a lot of people are moving, and then the migrants are happening in Europe or maybe coming to Asia or coming to US, and then we all know that each government is responding to that. So, and the civil societies, the funding organizations are also responding to that. So I have observed the shift that many of the financiers are shifting back the focus from the South Asian countries or Southeast Asian countries to their own countries. For example, my ex-organization that I worked for the last 12 years shifted the focus back to Japan, because Japan is also going through a lot of the difficulties among the children. So it becomes a bit difficult for my previous organization to justify that why do we fund only the programs in India or Cambodia. So in that way, I think the public discourse is also moving around that is impacting the shift of the philanthropic organizations' focus in terms of geography. The second shift that I talk about, the thematic shift, I observe the shift of the philanthropic organization focus from the important issue to prevention. So we have conducted the research in 2021, right after or right in the middle of the COVID. And then I don't have the data before the COVID, but at that point of time, we did the research with the 22 financiers in India. And then 86% of the finances focusing on the prevention, whereby only 9% of the finances focusing on the survival leadership programs. So while the financiers or the philanthropic organizations are cognizant about the importance of some of the critical elements for the theory of change of the anti-trafficking work, however, because of the heightened government regulation as well as the justifiable reasons at the board, perhaps. So they are shifting the focus from the critical area to the prevention work, which is very important, I would say. However, diversification of the funding is, I think, a little bit disproportionate to the needs of the ground. So that's the thematic shift that I observed over the last 12 years. The third, I think philanthropic organizations are also shifting the approach. Last time, maybe the small philanthropic organizations are funding the grassroots organization individually, but also the philanthropic organization realize about the importance of the larger impact for the systems to change. So I have observed that the finances coming together and then channelize the fund through one organization, and this organization become the fund manager or the fund aggregator. So that means that the selection criteria all depends on this one particular organization rather than holding the diverse view of the different financiers. So that's another Yes, so that is the response mechanism to the higher admin cost, perhaps, or higher government control, or and aiming for the higher impact. So these are the three shifts that I have observed over the last 12 years.
Thank you. It's a great segue kind of into the next part of this conversation, looking at big picture. I know for us as a smaller grassroots organization, it's often, we've looked at like the big grants, you know, USAID, things like that. It's felt like we've had a choice between just like not being able to access them or having to dedicate a ridiculous amount of resources to reporting and like going through all the requirements. And so it's just meant like, I know Helen Sworn will often say this, and it's not substantiated by data at all, but she's like, yeah, you know, 80% of the funding goes to 20% of the organizations. And I don't know like if that's true in those numbers, but it certainly feels like so much of the funding is stuck at the top, and the grassroots organizations really struggle. So, you know, we ended up talking kind of through some of these ideas, and I think, Kneath, you're the one that even pointed out that it's not just inefficient, it's also unjust and inequitable. So I want to explore that a little bit and go into some thoughts about solutions and how we can do things differently or think differently about funding and partnerships. So I'm going to go back to Tomomi. You said when we were having our conversation something about for Asia, by Asia, and it really piqued my interest. So I'm curious, what did you mean by that? And even how is your organization involved in encouraging that?
Thank you. So Asia for Asia, I resonate a lot with what Mallika said and Kneath talked about. This shock of the USAID closure, as well as the aid monies shrinking, is impacting all of us. But how are we able to look at it as the opportunity to unlock the potential in this region? So me being a Japanese, and I have been working in the international organization for long, but there was, it is undeniable that we look at US, UK, Europe to fund us, because that's where the social capital or the financial capital lies. But what about us? We also have a lot of social capital, financial capital, which we have been blind to. So what is going to enable us to be able to unlock our own potential? And for me, Asia for Asia means that the perspective shift, but again, I'm talking about a shift. The perspective shift is required for us to be able to unlock our own potential, Asia for Asia. That doesn't mean that we are going to exclude the philanthropic organization or the high net worth individual from US or from UK or from Europe. But how are we going to build our own ownership? So the perspective shift that in my opinion, we need to look into is three important aspects. One is our ownership. So I talked about that we have been always looking at somebody needs to fund me, and that person must be coming from the rich countries. But how are we going to rebuild our own ownership to this issue? To, you know, where are we going to get the funding? How am I going to generate the funding for the work which is very important for the entire sector, as well as for my organization, for the people that I have been working with, and for me. So the rebuilding the ownership is one key to change the perspective on this issue. The second, for us to be able to look into Asia for Asia, I think it is important for us to shift our perspective from distinctiveness to the resonance. I have been enjoying observing all the breakout session and panel discussion over the last 2 days, sorry, not 2 years, 2 days. And I have been hearing that, okay, this might be the case in the Philippines, but it is different in India. This might be the case in India, but it doesn't apply in Cambodia. So we always look at the distinctiveness, which is beautiful, but maybe it is a time for us to shift a little bit more towards the resonance. So where do I resonate with you? Which aspect of what you have been doing is resonating with what we have tried in our different countries? So shifting the perspective from the distinctiveness to the resonance might be able to build a little bit more trust to the Asian country-based philanthropic organizations also. So right now USAID get closed down, and we don't expect somebody else to replace that entirely, and that also doesn't serve us, because I think this is the opportunity for us to look into what is the meaning behind this USAID closure, which worked, which didn't work. This is the opportunity for us to address, okay, if this didn't work in the USAID, and where do we want to rectify, and what new forms do we want to explore? So for us to be able to do that, we need to focus a little bit more on the resonance than the distinctiveness, perhaps. That also applies to me. And the third is, I think Nathan, on the day one in the panel, talked about that saviorship. And then I also use a lot in my work about the drama triangle, shifting from the drama triangle to the empowerment dynamics. So some of you may be aware what the drama triangles is and what the empowerment dynamics are. And if not, then maybe you can Google it. And savior, victim, savior, perpetrator, this is the component of the drama triangle. And often, this drama triangle is the anxiety-based, problem-focused. I'm very anxious. I don't know how to do it. I can't do this. Somebody needs to save me. Somebody has been bullying me. So this is the source of this drama triangle. For us to be able to move to the empowerment dynamics, it is important for us to focus on the passion-driven, outcome-focused. And that will enable us to be able to redefine the preconceived notion, such as philanthropy. So what does philanthropy mean? All of us has the preconceived notion that the philanthropy comes from the rich person, but is that the only philanthropy that we would like to build? So this enables us to be able to redefine the terms which is important for this sector to open up the possibility which we have not been aware of. So these are the three important components for me to talk about the Asia for Asia. I don't know whether it's making sense.
Total sense. I loved it. I think it's so encouraging, and we've griped about how the funding works for a really long time, and I love the idea of okay, let's rebuild something different. We have that opportunity now. And in a way, we're being forced to, which is not terrible. So, Mallika, I think you guys have really had to do the whole shift very internally in your organization, kind of similar to what you're talking about, Tomomi, just shifts in thinking. And I'm curious if you would share a little bit about how the loss of the funding that you guys have had, how that has turned into re-strategizing for you and what that's meant.
It's been actually a very difficult season for us at Freedom Collaborative, to be honest with you. So aside from obviously losing our funding virtually overnight, I actually have not received a salary since February this year, which has been actually a long time if you think about it. So being in a survival mode, the kind of the silver lining of it is that it forces you to reconnect and also engage with your program and seeing what works and what doesn't. We have a lot to think about at Freedom Collaborative, sitting down, thinking through our strategy and seeing what actually our core model is and what actually has worked so far. So what are the strengths and the non-negotiable of our work? What are the things that we are not willing to compromise and the things that we'll keep going, even if funding is not possible? But then there's also some other questions on other things as well. So what are the things that we have to be willing to let go of? Things that we have to like just kind of like let it fade away, even though it might mean that all this work that we've been doing for the past 10 years have been basically let go, or another organization may have decided to take on that mantle, which is not the worst problem to have, but at the same time, we have a lot of, obviously integrity and pride in what we do. And so like whatever it is that's ownership of the work that we want to do, we want to sustain that, but at the same time, there's no, obviously with the solution that we have, it's always about being flexible and being willing to let go if things are not sustainable at this time. The one thing we keep coming back to over and over is this fundamental question, which we were actually surprised that like many NGOs don't know the answer to this question because they have not had the ability to reflect. What are the things that are funder driven and what is actually impactful? So a lot of times an organization think these two are mutually exclusive. So like the things that the donors and the funders want are the things that actually are gonna make an impact. That's actually not always the case. And for us to see that and see that NGOs are actually kind of like stuck in this like very kind of like a hole where they have to think this way and they cannot really see outside this tunnel vision is actually a little bit of a dangerous precedent, because you're just blindly following what funders want. And then, as you know, funding is not always sustainable, so that can just go sideways very quickly. So for us personally at Freedom Collaborative, we've been working really hard to figure out our strategy and seeing what we can do for the next steps. How to continue our work with or without funding, and also more importantly, how to do it in an ethical, conscientious, and sustainable way. So all of these things are really important to us, and we will not compromise those things. We know for a fact, after a lot of reflection, a lot of back and forth, our network is actually one of the most important, if not the most important thing of our work. All the coalition, all the NGOs working together who are part of our partnerships and also part of our network. We really have anti-trafficking professionals, over 3,000 now, about almost 4,000 around the globe, who actually work with us and have been basically the core tenet of what we do. Those are the things that we will not compromise. And then we also have, of course, like our incredible working group for trafficking for forced criminality. So actually yesterday during the panel on forced criminality, all the members who were speaking, who are amazing, are actually members of our working group. We provide a safe space for NGOs to come together and to talk openly, collectively about what are the gaps, what are the challenges, what are the things that work and also hasn't, and that for us will keep going. We also have an extensive network of the East African and Horn of Africa Anti-Trafficking Network. So in this part of this initiative, we have over 200 NGOs in East Africa responding to human trafficking. And so through this wider network, we realize that even though we are just the ones bringing all the NGOs together, they're really the ones kind of like bringing together the work and moving forward on those steps. So realizing that we have to really evolve and adapt is important. We have to do it also without losing our core value and also the essence of who we are. So honestly speaking, it's really impossible for us to have to have zero mission drift. We have to stray a little bit away from what we do, because otherwise we're not going to be able to survive. So for us, for me, myself personally, I actually had to take on 2 different consultancies this year in order to be able to sustain working at Freedom Collaborative without any funding. So one of those work is actually through working at the Thailand and Myanmar border, supporting victims of forced criminality, conducting victim ID screening. And so that was only possible to the generosity of A21, who's actually here in the room with us. The other project that I had to do, another consultancy, is the report that is up and coming by the Regional Support Office of the Bali Process, who's also here with us, working on looking at victim typology of individuals exiting cyber scam compounds in Myanmar and also around the globe, and what that looks like as a spectrum rather than as a binary victim and perpetrator typology. So if you hear those 2 different consultancies, that's actually really different to what I do at Freedom Collaborative. My role as a head of partnerships, I'm really all about connecting, mobilizing, and also ensuring that NGOs talk to each other. This is very much direct, and that's only because I've been working in the front line for almost 10 years now. Talking to Julia, our CEO, we just realized it's so important that, even though right now this is a really unusual time, unprecedented time, it's just so crucial to just not only stick to our strength, but also be willing to be a bit creative and also think outside the box. Do things that might not be considered normal, because honestly, it's not really a normal time for anyone right now. And so whatever it is that we have to do it, and also be willing to just be flexible and just adapt along the way.
Thank you. So, Jennifer, you've been quiet. I know you and your team, one of the things I really appreciated was within days of everything falling apart, Dark Bali is a partner of Imago Day. We got an email, how are you? And that was really meaningful. And I'm curious, how that fits in Imago Day. Why? How do you guys define success?
I just want to start by saying it's a real pleasure to be in this room with you. I'm really grateful for the just tremendous learning that has happened in the past couple of days. We're going through a really challenging time right now. And you're asking about success. I would say in this sector is broken. It has been broken for a long time. It's been inequitable for a long time. Part of that is because too many funders, including ourselves, have looked at success too one-dimensionally. It has been associated with scale. How fast can you scale? How big are the numbers? A linear trajectory, growth that is never ending. It's exhausting to nonprofit leaders. And I think this shift in global aid is causing all of us to rethink what is a more appropriate, more equitable definition of success. Some of the things we've been thinking about at the Imago Day Fund that would more broadly define success is how could we build a more vibrant, healthy ecosystem? An ecosystem where there's room for small grassroots organizations, mid-size organizations, and large organizations, and also networks and coalitions. I think that would be certainly a more equitable way of looking at success. The old way, it's very competitive, it's very territorial. There's this sense of just particularly rife with rivalry. If there is a vibrant, healthy ecosystem, there are roles that both nonprofits can play and funders can play. And for nonprofits, I would say you're already doing it in this room, because the answer, I think, for the role of nonprofits is to really participate, form those partnerships, form those coalitions, form those networks, and that's already happening here. So then what is the role of the funder? And I do have some ideas and suggestions for my peer funders in this room and who are listening online. The first thing I would say is it's really important to fund the grassroots organizations. They are the lifeblood of this movement. They are the shock absorbers of this vacuum that has been created, and it's really important to fund the grassroots leaders and organizations. In addition, it's really important to fund those networks and coalitions. It's not an either-or situation, it's funding both. Those networks and coalitions really form important relationships and important linkages that really drive collective impact. The other thing I would encourage my fellow funders is to, if possible, offer unrestricted funding. It allows for innovation, it allows for creativity. We've heard from our partners, it's a game changer, we know. I would also say if there's a possibility to offer multi-year support, offer multi-year support. It provides stability for an organization and vision casting for leaders. And the last thing I would say is it's important for funders to pay attention to the burnout risk of leaders, especially in this time. There's a way to offer funding for that support as well, to protect mental health, protect well-being, protect teams, allow leaders just to really thrive in this environment, as challenging as it is.
You're singing our song. Yes. It caught my ear. You talked about innovation. And, I think innovation happens at all levels. I do think the grassroots level is particularly equipped for innovation. But if you're a Brene Brown groupie like me, you might have heard that vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation. And we have to be okay with failure in order to innovate. And one of the issues that I've seen with the funding structures is, well, if it didn't work out, then you failed, and we're not going to fund you again. And I'm like, if it didn't work out, we know it doesn't work. and now we know what to do going forward. It's a success. And so I love the idea of funders that get behind the grassroots community and say, let's figure out what works. Like, we're gonna fail a few times, some stuff's not gonna work. And that just means we're moving forward. It means we're moving forward. It means we're moving forward. And I know, Kneath, you and I have talked a lot about kind of this whole thought process and the idea of if our goal is to fulfill our mission, shouldn't we be trying to work ourselves out of a job and get smaller rather than getting bigger and bigger and bigger in our projects? Shouldn't we be thinking about like combining organizations because we don't need as much anymore because things are successful, right? Success should actually mean getting smaller. And so many other thoughts. So I'm curious, you know, if you want to add to that, like what are the questions we should be asking ourselves, particularly as nonprofit leaders? What are the conversations we should be having with our donors? Which is really scary, by the way, for those of you that are donors. But what are the conversations we need to be brave enough to be having with one another and with those that fund our projects?
Yeah, I love this question. Questions that challenge us and make us feel a bit uncomfortable, I think, are the ones that we need to be asking every day. I think that the first thing we need to be asking ourselves as NGOs and as donors is actually quite high level. I mean, it's kind of been mentioned that no one is going to backfill that money that's now been lost, right? Nobody has access to those funds. And so arguably, the only possible future of aid is justice. And what I mean by that is countries in the global north, and I'm going to have to read a quote here from Jason Hickel. Countries in the global north give around 125 billion in aid annually. The global south loses far more than that each year through debt payments, unfair trade policies, tax avoidance, and profit repatriation. So we're working in a system where wealth is extracted structurally and then partially returned as charity. Right? So that is the issue that we're kind of working in here. And although that seems so much bigger than us as individual organizations, on a panel yesterday or the day before, someone mentioned there's 100 years of experience on this panel. Well, there must be thousands of years of experience in this room, right? And so we need to make sure that our voice comes together, and we are contributing to these bigger conversations around justice versus aid. That's a major piece that I think we need to consider. On an individual level, this year is Chab Dai's 20-year anniversary. We're super excited about that. It's an incredible achievement. However, I would say that a non-profit anniversary is different to your wedding anniversary or different to other types of anniversaries, because sometimes when you celebrate your anniversary in a wedding or a relationship, here's to the next 20 years, okay? But with a non-profit, we have to be thinking, do we want to be here in 20 years? And when you found an organization, you need to be asking, did I ever want to be there for 20 years? Because the idea is that we're always trying to address an issue and then scale back or step aside. There will always be a need for civil society to hold power to account. So I'm not saying we don't have civil society, but we should always be looking at ways that we can step aside and really make duty bearers responsible, right? And how do we build that levels of accountability? So I think we need to be asking ourselves the question, what would happen if we weren't here in 5 years' time? And if our immediate reaction is, oh no, all of these people are going to be so vulnerable, it's over for them, okay, that's terrifying for two reasons. One, for the individuals, but also for the system. And we need to be thinking, how are we building healthy systems that do not rely on us? How are we building that into our programming at all times to make sure that we're not creating parallel systems, we're creating stronger systems? So I think that's something we need to ask as organizations. And the other thing with the recent, sorry, I had my, oh, there's my phone. I'm timing myself in case I go over. The other thing we need to be thinking about is, I feel the USAID funding cuts have been framed as we're now in competition with each other. Here's some funds, we all want those funds, right? LinkedIn, you would have posts from fundraising experts. USAID is no longer available, but here is all this funding money. Go for it, okay? 100,000 shares and likes, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like we're fighting for scraps at the table. We're not in competition. We need to be talking about collaboration.
How can we work together and not compete with each other? Okay? That's where the real strength is. Human trafficking, exploitation, these are extremely complex issues. No organization, no matter its size, no matter its budget, can address these issues. We have to work together. No matter our size, we have to come to the table to work together, right? Collaboration, not competition. And then for questions that are donors, and some of this has already been raised, is around dialogue. Please listen to the grassroots organizations. Listen to our local leaders who are running these organizations. They know best. Support local, but don't overwhelm local, okay? Do not treat local organizations as international NGOs with the same level of compliance and such forth. This doesn't mean you don't have to do M&E anymore. M&E is really important. Blue Dragon, in a breakout room, we're saying we don't do M&E for donors. We do M&E so our decisions are informed by evidence, okay? So we continue to do that as organizations, absolutely. But, you know, as you were mentioning, organizations go under the compliance of organizations like USAID in the past. And then again, yeah, simplifying requirements. And finally, as already been mentioned, trust-based philanthropy. If anybody reads The Economist, last year there was a whole brief on trust-based philanthropy and how it was the future of aid. And then the USAID funding cuts came, and now suddenly it was, you need to measure absolutely every single thing, you have to fight for this single dollar and everything else. And so let's get back to where we were heading, and that's to trust these local organizations, because even when these funding cuts are taking place, it's been risen, they're still there. They're still working, and they're still supporting people. So I think those are some of the questions that we can start asking ourselves.
I love it. So Jennifer, how has Imago Dei Fund approached the loss of funding with your partners? What have you seen as the results? How have your partners reacted to the situation? Like, what has this been like from your perspective?
It was devastating from our perspective. I was overseas at the time when all of this started happening, back in February or so, and it was really hard actually to be outside of my country watching what was happening by my country, and I'm sorry. So it was very hard. The first thing we did, though, was to reach out to our partners and to say, how are you experiencing this? What is happening? We engaged in deep, deep listening, and not surprisingly, understood that everybody was impacted, if not directly and immediately, then indirectly and not in the too distant future. So everybody was impacted in some way. So we decided that this was a moment for us to lean in, to take risks, to just step in and step up. And we offered a round of solidarity grants to all of our partners. No application was required. We already have long-term partners or relationships with these partners. We don't need them to take precious time away to complete an application when we're already in relationship with them. We already know what they're doing. We already know they're doing incredible work. So we were able to disperse the funds very, very quickly. And these were solidarity grants that went out to all of our partners. We also recognized that, like I said earlier, the burnout risk was extremely high. The stress and anxiety was really significant. So we also dispersed, here again, no application needed, just what we call Keep the Spark Alive grants. And this was additional funding for organizational leaders to just focus on the mental health of themselves and their team, do some team building activities that would just allow them to thrive and flourish despite what was going on. Maybe some team retreats. There were some really creative ways that our partners used this Keep the Spark Alive funding. The other thing we did is we looked at the networks and coalitions in our portfolio that already existed and leaned into that, offered additional funding to those to preserve those really critical relationships and linkages that I was talking about. That's how change is going to happen, through those relationships. We encouraged our partners to form partnerships, to form new coalitions, new networks, and we funded that. Just giving people space to breathe, room to cast a vision despite feeling like things were falling down around them. So as a result of all of this, I feel like we all collectively, both the Imago Dei Fund team and our partners, felt a sense of solidarity that we're in this together. We're equal partners. We may provide the funding, you provide the expertise, you know what's going on the ground, you know how to help the communities. We're all in this together. And so we're going to continue that path and stick with each other.
Awesome. So we are going to leave some time for questions. So I'm going to give maybe just a 2-minute answer from each of you, all for the same questions, and we'll just start with Kneath and work our way down. So you all represent organizations in the sector with very different focuses: grant-making organizations, networks, service providers. So what is your advice to other organizations like your own to move forward and build something even better than we have before? I know we've kind of given some of those thoughts, but if there's anything you left out, you've got 2 minutes to give us a brain dump.
No, I think I would just reiterate the key point around collaboration and not competition. I just think it's so important. We need to work together and think systems. Systems thinking is so important. The other thing I would say is be transparent about your limitations. Something I would like to see in ARAT in future years would be a festival of failure, where we celebrate our failures and then our lessons learned, because no organization is perfect. And if they tell you they are, red flag, okay? Walk away. So be transparent about your limitations, but also be generous with what you do have, right? Your networks, your lessons learned, resources. How can we work together? Not just NGOs, but businesses, government, etc. Okay, so be generous with what you have, but know your limitations, and always be thinking, how can we contribute to healthy systems that can exist without us? We are not trying to fund the institution. We're trying to resolve an issue, right? Which is our mission, and that should always be our focus. So, you see it in proposals. What is your exit strategy, or something like this? Think about that more deeply as an organization. I generally do believe, as I said prior, think years ahead and then work years back in milestones. Future thinking is really important beyond just, say, 3-year strategic plans, even when the situation is so volatile, I think. So, but yeah, just be kind to each other and work together. That would be my thing.
Yes. So for me, this panel topic is about towards more just future. So I would like to suggest to create a space to ask a question: what does this justice mean to me? And what does this justice mean to you? And where and how can we create the common definition of the justice together? I think at this time of the disruption, it is important for us to have somebody as a co-traveler. And I really like the concept of the collaboration, not the competition. That's I totally agree with you. And what does this collaboration mean? So I brought up in Japan, so I have been taught this is what the collaboration means. And this is very strong culture in Asia that we receive what we have learned. However, it is a time for us to ask a question to ourselves: what does this mean to me? And how can we create the innovation? And how can we break through the disruption time that we are going through together? And for us to be able to do that, it is very, very important and powerful to ask a question, which is not encouraged in the Asian culture, at least not in Japan, but it is very critical to ask a question: what does this justice mean? I asked this question to the survivors at one of the review meeting 10 years ago, and the response was totally, totally different from what I assumed. And that got integrated in the core of the program. So let's ask a question: what does this mean?
It's hard to give an advice because a lot of times, like, being in the spot is actually like giving the advice back to myself. But I think in general, it's important to stay hopeful and just keep optimistic, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel, and actually a lot of organizations are your networks, are your colleagues. Just lean on them and just know that your network, your partnerships, the people you work with are actually more extensive than you think they are. They're there to help you. Like, my friends at A21 and also the Bali Process RSO, who have quickly stepped in and helped to support us, has been, the lifeline that we all kind of needed to get through. Don't be afraid to get creative and think outside the box. I think a lot of times we're constrained by organizational mandate, our policies, and things that we do. It's important now that this is the time to think outside the box, think about alternative funding sources, think about what else you could do to kind of challenge yourself and do more outside of this space. The other thing that I hear, which is an advice floating around, which I want to actually target a little bit, is that there's a lot of, well-meaning advice to go back and look at your organization, go back and scrutinize your strategy, scrutinize what you've done. I actually think that's a complete waste of time. It's just bogus to go back and rethink through everything that you work for, because honestly, if you have not had the need and also the motivation and the passion to do the work, you would have been challenged way before this. So know and believe in everything that you do and everything that you stand for your organization. Don't get stuck in that could have, should have mentality. And lastly, even though I know that obviously the USAID funding fallout happened earlier this year, it's been about 5 or 6 months of that now, the crisis is actually not over. Even though the storm has passed, we're still picking up the debris. We're still doing a lot of work. And the fact that we're still existing and without funding is actually not a good thing. So even though we're being calm up on stage, talking in a panel, it's actually not a good thing that we're in this space and having this really vulnerable conversations right now. So just be kind to each other and also check in with each other. See which organization, especially local grassroots organizations who are maybe a little bit quiet, they're not quiet, obviously they're quiet for a reason. So just check in, see what else you can do, and also extend your network, because in the end, this could happen to anyone. And we know there's a lot of vulnerability in fundraising for NGOs. And so, it could happen to you someday. So just be kind, check in with each other, and help each other out.
I love what the panel has shared. I really appreciate all of these comments and thoughts. And I would echo that to the grassroots leaders and the organizations. Trust yourself, keep the mission, keep going. To the funders, please, it's an encouragement and an invitation to offer that unrestricted multi-year funding to the grassroots leaders and the networks that they're a part of. And it's a time to lean in, to take risks, be bold, and be part of this collective solution.
All right. I am incredibly proud of us because we are 3 minutes under time, which means we have even more time for questions. So if you haven't dropped your question in Huva, please do. And then I will ask, I think, Lucy, are you reading our questions? Awesome.
Delana, do you want to end at 11:45 or 12? Schedule says 11:45.
Oh. We're going to 12.
Great. Okay. First question, what can anti-trafficking grassroots organizations do to help funders or impact investors better assess the efficiency of their work in order to secure long-term investment?
Like so many things in life, it all begins and ends with relationships. So it's investing in the relationship with a potential donor, to get to know them, for them to get to know you, to really take the long view. This is not just about funding a budget, it's about fulfilling a mission, and to look for those mission-aligned partners and to work together.
Hi, sorry. For Tomomi, do you find that other Asian funders share the Asia for Asia mindset?
I would say yes. I have met with a couple of the Asia-based philanthropic organizations in Singapore, in Japan, and sorry, question was?
Do you find other Asian funders share the Asia for Asia mindset?
Yes, sorry, I missed that point. Yes, I heard more and more Asia-based philanthropic organization talking about Asia for Asia. So in Singapore, when we were having a conversation with the multiple financing organization, philanthropic organization in Singapore, they also, many of them talk about Asia for Asia. Now is the time. And through the online, we have also did the interview with a couple of the philanthropic organizations in Southeast Asia. And also we have been having a conversation with the India-based domestic philanthropic foundation. And they are aware that now is the time for Asia for Asia.
Woo. What is your advice to funders who are interested to get to know and support local grassroots organizations based in communities? What approach should they take?
It's actually it can be quite difficult to also access and have that first engagement because, as you know, grassroots organizations are so many, and there's so many different types responding to anti-trafficking. And so my general advice is use the resources that you have. So at Freedom Collaborative, we have a global network of 3,000 advocates and professionals working in this space. You can come through organizations like ours to make that first contact. We can easily help you reach out to certain communities, organizations, coalitions, and that way you won't have to do the heavy brunt of the work trying to reach out to all of these different organizations at once.
I would add that me being in that position 12 years back, it was not easy for the financiers to be able to build the relationship with the grassroots organizations or the survivors collective, let's say. Because language is the big barrier. Not only about the English, Bengali, or the Hindi kind of the language barrier, but the language that we use are very different from the language that the grassroots organization use. That I realized when we were making a presentation in one of the review meetings. Me as a financer, we are very used to the graphs, analysis, bullet point, make it very concise, design-wise. And then I have received the feedback from the survivors. Didi, bullet point doesn't make any sense. Please put it into the story. Otherwise, I'm not able to understand what you're trying to say. So it takes time. And that taking a time is very important to get to know each other, to understand where they are coming from, and also important for them to understand where I am coming from. And that is how we will build the partnership, which will motivate or inspire the impact investor or the philanthropic organization to really build the partnership with the grassroots organization, including the Survivors Collective.
I just have one other thought I'd love to share. It's this sense of try to shift the mindset from competing for funding to sharing funding. I can speak that it is very valuable when we hear from our partners who else we should be funding, who else in their ecosystem and in their network that is helping them achieve their goals and do their work, who they need the funding, and it's very helpful when we know who they are. So share your funders and make introductions and support each other.
So building on that, in this competitive climate for securing funding, how do you think anti-trafficking organizations can shift how they present themselves to funders without compromising their core values and the essence of their work? How can they avoid shaping their narratives solely to win funding and instead stay grounded in the realities and integrity of their efforts?
I think that, again, this connects back to this idea around collaboration and not competition. Again, so sorry to keep banging the same drum, but I just think that at a time when organizations are vulnerable, you really kind of be able to reach out to your networks and other organizations for support, and especially grassroots organizations that have connections with these organizations. Coalitions are just so important, and making sure that those values align. Now, there's a real problem when we talk about having to. Mission drift is unavoidable. it happens. And when you're in a crisis situation, it absolutely happens, okay? Because you have a team that you need to support. That team is doing fantastic work, and you might have to shift slightly or reframe slightly in order to secure that funding. That is currently a reality of the situation. I wish we would move forward to a situation where it's all flexible funding, where it's all unrestricted funding. But we still have to go through a process of repackaging. I think the issue is that when you're repackaging something too much and it really feels like you're starting to drift, you have to stop. Because at that point, as I mentioned before, you're funding the institution, you're trying to keep the organization alive, and that's not the mission of the organization. And if it gets to that crisis point, I think that's when you have to look at what organizations in my area are doing similar work to me. How can we either collaborate? How can we merge? How can we make sure that the people we are supporting could be supported by others? And there does come a time when, as organizations, we do have to take into consideration we cannot secure funding. How do we phase out? It's a really hard question. No one wants to talk about it, but it has to be put on the table as a possibility, I think. So yeah, I 100%, a little bit of tweaking here and there to fit that call for proposal. For when you start drifting off, yeah, then you have to start asking the harder questions. And as leaders, and I said this right at the beginning, we have to ask ourselves these hard questions. Constructive criticism. You know, we were talking about savior complex and this type of thing, and we can fall into a trap of, we're doing a good job, I can feel we're doing a good job, etc. But you still have to ask yourself the difficult question. How can we do things differently? People say, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I don't agree with that. Look for an alternative model to do it even better, or look for an alternative model to do it in a different way. So, yeah, I don't know if that really specifically answers the question. There has to be flexibility and there has to be fluidity, but don't be afraid as well to answer those really hard questions, I would say.
Yeah, just to add to what Kneath talked about, I was in New York 2 weeks ago, again 2 years, 2 weeks ago, and I was attending one of the conference where the big US-based funders were supposed to come, and then they back off in the last minute. Here as well, I see a very limited number of the finances coming and participating in person, maybe because we are busy, I don't know. But I keep hearing that the financiers are also feeling a bit scared that everybody's coming for me for money. But what I want is to build a partnership. So when I can sense that you're coming to me asking for the money, and that doesn't give me a very nice feeling, and then that scares me. So I think I feel a lot about the financiers are also persons, people, and they have the emotions also. So I think to create some space to listen may be the starting point, rather than busy that how am I going to present myself so that I can get the funding. So that energy is anyway leaking out in the space, which threaten us perhaps.
Yeah, I would just say that we've been talking a lot about organizations, nonprofits collaborating with together and using those networks, but also your donors, as you've kind of mentioned, have networks as well. And if you've built up that trust, that's often the first place to go. Do you know other organizations that I connect with? You know us, you know the great work we're doing. Because unsolicited funding, going after grants and so forth, it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. And it's so challenging. It's all about relationships. The whole thing is about relationships. So yeah, I just want to add that. Thanks.
I just want to affirm what you're saying, Kneath. 50% of my job is working with nonprofits and nonprofit leaders, current partners and prospective partners, but the other 50% is developing relationships with peer funders, understanding what their priorities are, understanding how they're building their portfolios, so that when I have an opportunity, I can make an introduction and a personal connection, because to your point, unfortunately, as unfair and inequitable as it is, those personal introductions can sometimes make more headway than the unsolicited. And so that's a big part of what I do, and a lot of other funders do, quite frankly.
That's great. What can researchers and people in academia do to help funding efforts? What data analysis might be helpful? What other types of academic and NGO partnerships could work specifically for funding?
Do you know what? That's such a great question, and it's already highlighted a massive gap because I don't know what research there already is. And so maybe that would be a place to start. How are we, if there is existing research, you know, I mentioned a comment from Jason Hickel about money that leaves countries as opposed to comes into countries. But if there is research that's already existing that looking at how grassroots organizations are funded, how even non-registered organizations, how they can obtain funds or how they have obtained funds, it's embarrassing to say that I don't even know if that field of research already exists. And if it does, is it behind a paywall? And if not, how do we make that accessible to everyone so that we can see and learn from that? But another thing is, of course, that we, as I mentioned before, trust-based philanthropy, we still need to be informed by evidence, right? That's how we build trust. Lots of organizations are overwhelmed by M&E. They can just maintain their own data collection. They might have, many organizations collect more data than they actually need and use. They have a wealth of information, but do not have time to analyze that information. So if there are researchers who can connect with these organizations and find ways to, obviously in an ethical way, to extract that information and make it presentable, to help put a spotlight on that organization, and then that organization can share that research, I think that would be great as well. So there is definitely collaborative opportunities there, some that I'm not aware of and would love to be aware of, so yeah.
So just to add on to that a bit, I think there's a big divide currently with like grassroots organization, NGOs and CSOs, and like researchers who are also doing dedicated work in this space. I would say like there's actually many different spaces they can get involved. Just to name a few, so at Freedom Collaborative, we have working groups to respond to forced criminality. So easily they could get involved in our working group initiative. They could come to meetings, they could hear about what's going on between organizations and also what is currently kind of like being worked on the ground. And so by being involved in this stage where they're not necessarily doing frontline work, but getting involved with frontline organizations, they can have a better picture as to what's going on. And I think through their role, whether that's through research or through advocacy, they can really add on to more narrative in this space as well.
I'm going to actually throw in an ad too, just kind of the same as what you're saying. The GLC has partnered with lots of people. Free the Slaves has started a group that's for researchers and academics, but it's actually open to anybody that wanting to do research. So if you're somebody working in an organization, you're like, I need to do some research, I need to understand my context. Is there somebody that could kind of coach me that actually knows what they're doing and how to do it? So like you're saying, finding ways that the grassroots folks and the researchers can connect. And so that is a space, if you're looking for something like that, we do have a group in the GLC kind of through Free the Slaves that is working with academics and researchers. So definitely you could jump in on that open invitation.
What kinds of shifts are you seeing in how funders are approaching anti-trafficking work? Are there particular priorities or values that you hope remain consistent, because if they were to change, they would unintentionally undermine the long-term efforts of organizations working to ensure justice and safety for survivors?
Some of the shifts or trends I'm seeing in the anti-trafficking sector is a real centering of survivor leadership. It's really important, and I'm really glad that that has been centered here at the conference. You know, funders in this space, it's really a wide variety of, some are wanting to fund prevention efforts, some are wanting to fund, you know, aftercare, protection efforts, or prosecution efforts. It's really a wide variety, and I think it's rare to find a funder who does it all. There tends to be a little bit more of a focused area in this space, but here again, I think there's an opportunity within, among the grassroots organizations to really educate funders on that everything is needed, and it's really important to collaborate on that.
In addition to what Jennifer talked about, I don't know whether it's going to respond to that question, but I started seeing that trafficking issue is one culmination of many different issues. So when we look at the community, whether the trafficking is the most important issue for them or not, and how the trafficking is narrated in the community setting, from which aspect. So I started seeing that the anti-trafficking initiative is also narrated around the intersectional areas, like climate change, or the intoxication, the abuse, the drug abuse happening in that local area, or the power, no. So anyway, so what I wanted to say is that the unpacking of the anti-trafficking initiative in the intersectional areas is also started happening, and I see the potential of diversifying the funding through that. Because right now, the anti-trafficking finances are very limited. But when we are able to expand the anti-trafficking work into the intersectional areas, then we may be able to tap into the funding which have never occurred to our mind, because we have been focusing only on the anti-trafficking fund.
A couple questions basically around advice involving businesses in funding through corporate social responsibility. So do you have any advice in ways to engage business through corporate social responsibility?
So I'm absolutely not an expert in this area, but I think that you need to be well prepared, I would say, to approach businesses. It's slightly different in terms of the relationship building and how you can show those companies how it potentially relates to their work, or how their work, more importantly, relates to your situation. You need to be able to build that connection. But I think it's definitely challenging in terms of you need a specific set of skills to be able to present in a certain environment. I'm not saying that's the case for everyone. There are some incredible social businesses, etc. But I think the space can be challenging in that way. And I think you need to be very open to collaboration. Move away from the mindset of business is bad, NGO is good, or something like this. Looking, again, as we were mentioning before, about this concept of working together. When I talk about system thinking, an NGO is a system, but it cannot address an issue, right? We need to work with businesses. We have to work with businesses, whether as funders or as partners. And again, so I think it's a little bit about learning the language, which is slightly different, I think, to the nonprofit language. And then similarly would be the same advice for businesses. But I'm certain there are some incredible businesses in this room that would be able to answer this question much better. So maybe they can make themselves known and we can approach them during the lunch hour.
That's great.
I think we have time for maybe one more question, and then I've asked these guys to make sure they jump on Huva, and because I think we have like 20-something questions on there, so if you see anything you want to ask, and like Kneath said, if you have something to say, you know the answer to some of these questions or have some ideas, jump in the chat as well. Lucy, do we have one more?
Yeah, last question. What role can countries like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, and Singapore do to support Asia for Asia shared counter-trafficking funding in the future?
I was very surprised that I'm the only Japanese in this ARAT conference. And you are also Japanese? Half. Okay. Thank you. So I'm not alone then. So I think I'm as much as the heart and the consciousness is there, but I think as far as I speak Japan, I don't know about the Australia, Singapore, New Zealand, South Korea context, but as far as Japan is concerned, this anti-trafficking work or the human trafficking issue is big. And it's a bit intimidating. And also for the business sector, in my previous organization also, we had a couple of the corporations supported our initiative, but then finding the relevance was a big hurdle. So I think I am much more interested in and also committed to bring more Japanese finances into this work, humanitarian work, human rights work. But it's going to take time because it needs to be unpacked. The elements of this needs to be unpacked for the Japanese society to be able to find the relevance, which I got the first crack recently with the Japanese small company when I was talking about what makes the particular group of the people particularly vulnerable to be trafficked. So what is the vulnerability factor there? So when we did the research with the survivor leaders as the researcher, they identify, in addition to all the vulnerability factors that we know, they identify one critical element, which is emotional deprivation, which I have never found in any of the research findings of the vulnerability factors. So when I was able to talk about this emotional deprivation as one of the vulnerability indicator for the people to be trafficked, then this consulting company, marriage consulting company, which is very interesting, so they said, I find the similar pattern among the Japanese young women when it comes to the marriage or the building the partnership. So for that, being able to build the relevance of what this sector has been talking about may be relevant to my context. So that may be the entry point for the Japanese society to be able to come into the sector. I am having as a hypothesis, but I don't have the proven evidence yet. But I am committed to explore this hypothesis.
Whew, that was a lot. Thank you guys so much. This was fantastic, and I know this conversation will continue. In fact, we have lunch now, so we can keep talking about it over lunch. Make sure you look at your schedule in Huva for the breakouts. After the breakouts, we'll come back in. We have a closing session that's very active. It's my favorite of the whole week. So make sure you come back after the breakouts. And yeah, enjoy your lunch.